Hello, fabulous fourth graders. It is Miss Shearer here, back for another 10-minute read aloud of the Toothpaste Millionaire. And check out who decided to join us. My cat Luna, curled up on the bed. All right, so we are now on chapter number 7, the Joe Smiley Show. Well, that's how Rufus's toothpaste business started, with Rufus figuring out that if he sold the toothpaste for only a penny more than it cost him to make, cost him about 2 cents a tube, that he'd soon have millions of customers. He had to start in a small way, of course. When he started his business, Rufus packed the toothpaste in baby food jars. A baby food jar holds about as much as a big tube, and the jars didn't cost him anything. People with babies were glad to save their jars for Rufus, as nobody had thought of a way of instantly recycling baby food jars before. When Rufus put a sign on the bulletin board at school saying that he could use the jars, kids brought us hundreds of them. We sterilized and filled the jars. When we had about 500 jars, Rufus and I stuffed our saddlebags with as many as they would hold and rode our bikes around the neighborhood selling the toothpaste. We sold quite a few jars. At only 3 cents a jar, most people felt that they could afford to give it a try, and most of the customers said that it was a good toothpaste. Still, I could not see how Rufus was going to get rich on 3-cent toothpaste unless millions of people knew about it. Then I had this idea about how he could get some free advertising. Everybody in Cleveland watches a program called the Joe Smiley Show. On the show, Joe interviews people who have interesting hobbies. I wrote Joe Smiley a letter telling him that I had this friend who has a hobby of making toothpaste and could make about a 2-year supply for the price of 1 tube. And Joe Smiley called up Rufus and asked if he would be on the show. Rufus was very good on the show, though I was afraid that he would never get around to talking about toothpaste. I was worried because when Joe Smiley asked Rufus how he had learned to make toothpaste, Rufus started telling him about his grandmother Mayflower. He told not only about the scrapbook paste, but about how his grandma Mayflower had made her own furnace out of 2 100-gallon oil barrels. Joe Smiley was so interested in that furnace that it was hard to get him off the subject of Rufus's grandmother. Rufus told about his grandmother taming raccoons, woodchucks, mice, chipmunks, and catbirds. And of course about her brushing her teeth with the plain baking soda. But the story I liked best was about his grandmother's name. It seems Mayflower was his grandmother's whole name. She didn't have any last name till she got married. Then she took her husband's name, which was Proctor, and was known as Miss Mayflower Proctor. But Rufus's grandmother never did like the name Proctor, because it was a slave name. Rufus explained that back when there were slaves, a black man was sometimes called by the name of the white family who owned him. So when Mayflower's husband died, she dropped the Proctor part of her name, and then she and her children went back to being Mayflowers. Then Social Security came along and said that she had to have a first name and a last name on her Social Security card. But rather than let the government put her down with a slave name, Miss Mayflower wrote the Social Security people and signed herself Miss Mayflower, with a space between the May and the flower. I love that story. In fact, I'm seriously thinking about changing my name to Mac Kinstry, as I don't care too much for Catherine. Mac sounds like a boy's name, and boys' names usually sound a lot more forceful than girls' names to me. But I'm getting off the subject of toothpaste, just as Rufus did on the Joe Smiley Show. You wouldn't think about all that stuff about Rufus's grandmother would sell toothpaste. But then, as my father pointed out, you wouldn't think Rufus's way of advertising the toothpaste would sell toothpaste either. Joe Smiley is the kind of guy who is always saying things are the greatest thing he'd ever heard of, or the most fantastic. If a girl comes on his show in a pink coat that Joe thinks is attractive, he'll say, "That's the most fantastic coat. There's nothing that's special about that coat. He just means it's nice." What I mean is he exaggerates. And everybody Joe has in the show is one of the greatest people he's ever met or has done the most fantastic thing. So when Joe does get on Rufus's toothpaste, he naturally gives it this big build-up. which is what I was counting on. And what does Rufus do? The conversation went something like this. Joe, now Rufus, this fantastic toothpaste that you make, I suppose it has a special secret formula. Rufus, no, it's made out of stuff anybody can buy for a few cents and mix up at home in a few minutes. Joe, fantastic. And of course it's much better than the kind you buy at the store. Rufus, I don't know about that, but it tastes pretty good, and for about 2 cents you can make as much as you get in a 79-cent tube. Joe, fantastic. And where can people get some of this great toothpaste? Rufus, if they live in East Cleveland, I'll deliver it to them on my bike. 3 ounces cost 3 cents. It cost me 2 cents to make, and I make 1 cent profit. If anyone outside East Cleveland wants some, I'll have to charge 3 cents plus postage. Joe, fantastic. And what do you call this marvelous new product? Rufus, toothpaste. Joe, just toothpaste? Doesn't have a name like Sparkle or Shine or Sensation or White Lightning or Personality Plus? Rufus, no, it's just plain toothpaste. It doesn't do anything sensational such as improve your smile or your personality. It just keeps your teeth clean. Who would have thought that telling people toothpaste wouldn't do one thing for their personalities would sell toothpaste? But 3 days after Rufus was on the Joe Smiley show, he got 689 orders for toothpaste. One came all the way from Venice, California, from a man who happened to be telephoning his daughter when she was watching the show in Cleveland. The daughter said, "There's a kid out here who's selling toothpaste for 3 cents a jar." And her father ordered 3 dozen jars. Fantastic. Now on to chapter 8, in which I become a stockholder. There's a song that goes, "I'll get by with a little help from my friends." Rufus couldn't have filled all the orders that poured in after the Joe Smiley show without some help from his friends. Luckily, after the show, a lot of kids began coming around every night after school to see how Rufus was doing. Rufus said they could hang around, but they'd have to help us pack the toothpaste. We were working in our laundry room now. When Rufus's mother decided she couldn't have her kitchen turned into a full-time toothpaste factory, I asked my mother if we could use the workshop at the end of our laundry room. My brother James had been using the workshop for his model cars, and my mother was glad for an excuse to make James move his workshop into the attic. James is not very neat. My father helped us build 2 long tables for the laundry room, and once Rufus and I got all the jars and supplies set up, the place really did look like a factory. Some afternoons we had 6 or 8 kids on the production line. Some of the kids were from school, some lived on my block, like Josie and Clem, the 2 girls from next door. Josie and Clem were at my house almost every night now. I guess they decided that if I was a friend of Rufus, I was okay. I was glad they were coming over so often, as Rufus and I were getting a little tired of washing so many jars. I never was crazy about washing dishes. "Hey Rufus," Josie said one night when she and I had washed about 200 jars. "What would you do if you had to pay us to wash all these jars for you?" "How about that, Rufus?" Clem said. "You couldn't sell that toothpaste for 3 cents if you had to pay us what we're worth." Rufus thought about that. "Well, I sure don't have enough profits to pay anybody yet," he said, "and I've got to use my first profits to buy more stuff to make more toothpaste. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you all some stock in my company. At the end of the year, every stockholder will get a share of the year's profits." And here was the picture of the production line. Clem thought Rufus was kidding, but he was serious. Rufus had this game called Stock Market. It's something like Monopoly. With every stock market game, you get these stock certificates that you can trade with other players. In Rufus's game, there were 1,000 shares of stock worth $100 a share. The certificates came in $1, $10, $50, and $100 shares. Rufus brought the stock certificates over to my house the next day to show us. "Here's how it'll work," he said. "Anybody that puts in 100 hours helping me make toothpaste gets a share of the stock worth $100, which will entitle him to a share of the company's profits. How much profit depends on how many shares of stock he owns." Rufus had made up a chart with all the names of his friends who had helped so far. He put down the number of hours they had already worked. Kate's already worked over 200 hours, Rufus said, so she gets to be the first stockholder. Rufus wrote my name on 2 $100 stock certificates. With these 2 shares of stock, Kate should get $5,000 if the company's profits works out the way I plan. $5,000? I said. Are you sure that's right, Rufus? Rufus laughed. Well, let Mr. Conti check out tomorrow. And we did. Kate McKinstry, would you please bring that note to me? Well, it's not exactly a note, Mr. Conti, etc. You get the picture. Mr. Conti's class figured out if Rufus was right about the $2.5 million profit he had figured out he could make, every owner of 1 share of stock would make $2,500. An owner of 10 shares would make $25,000, and so on. It sounded so good that everybody in our math class wanted to sign up to work for shares. Even Mr. Conti told Rufus that he'd give us a hand if we needed extra help on Saturdays. When the money starts rolling in, Rufus said, we may need some help adding it all up. Mr. Conti also gave Rufus some advice. He told Rufus that he shouldn't give out more than 499 shares of the stock. You have to keep 501 shares yourself to keep control of how you want the company to run, Mr. Conti said. Otherwise, the other stockholders could outvote you. What did Mr. Conti mean, outvote you? I asked Rufus later. Maybe vote to sell toothpaste for 79 cents, Rufus said, which would be against my principles. Naturally, I promised Rufus I would never vote to do that. All right, we are now past the 10-minute mark. So we will read chapter 9 next time. And I do want to let you guys know that I plan on doing a read aloud every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I'll update the document every time that I've done that. That is the goal. So I will see you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And hopefully Luna will be joining us as well. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great weekend, and I hope you enjoy the weather today. It is Friday, April 9th, and it is very breezy out there, but the sun is shining. So have a great rest of your day. It is up to you to make it happen.